You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host, Dimitri Vitsa. I'm also the CEO and founder of Rock, Paper, Scissors, a PR firm that specializes in music technology. And before we get to our awesome guest today, you may have heard that we have now launched and announced that the Music Tectonics Conference is going online for 2020. It's October 27th through 28th, 2020. Last year in 2019, we launched the conference in LA. We went to LA specifically because of the convergence of music and technology, record labels, sync and TV and film, gaming, social media, so much cool stuff happening in LA and not many events like Music Tectonics there. But this year we're going global because we have to go online. We wanted everybody to be safe, and it means we could probably grow the event and have more regional diversity and lots of interesting players who would have liked to have been to LA but maybe couldn't have traveled. So we're really excited. Go to musictectonics.com to find out about who's going to be there and how you can register. It's a super affordable badge of $59, so that's another advantage of it being remote. We've got some speakers like Scott Cohen, the Chief Innovation Officer for Warner Music Group. We've got the great music tech journalist Sherry Hu. We've got the head of music from Roblox. We've got some cool mixed reality folks coming in, sync folks, lots of great speakers. And one thing we're working really hard on this year is we've come up with some technology that makes networking not only easy but fun. We've come up with something that we think you'll have a blast doing. We've tested out with our own Music Tectonics and Rock, Paper, Scissors team, and it's actually making our meetings a blast. You'll get a chance to meet one-on-one with folks and get some business done at the same time. So go to musictectonics.com and check out all the conference info. And let's get to our episode this week. I've brought on Rishon Blumberg, who is an artist manager with Brickwall Management. He also has a company called 10X Management, where he's translated a lot of what he does with musicians and producers into the world of tech talent. Rishon, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. How's New York today?
New York is about to brace for a brush with Tropical Storm Isaiah. At some point today, it's going to start hitting. There were some pre-rains last night that were pretty hard and brutal. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. We'll see.
It's nonstop. We've got pandemics and recessions and storms. Man, the music industry is doing its best, right?
Yeah, I mean, 2020 is like a greatest hits of disasters. So I can't imagine what we have in store for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Let's jump into it. What's been the biggest impact of COVID-19 in terms of the effects on you as an artist manager?
I mean, it really starts with this feeling of helplessness and seeing people whom I care about both directly and indirectly, and who I work with directly and indirectly, suffering from, a complete shutdown of everything touring related, not everything music related, but everything touring related. I mean, to see people whose, livelihood was thriving up until about the middle of March, essentially become unemployed and unemployable for God knows how long that this is going to be in the system. That's been the toughest part. From a rubber meets the road standpoint, obviously all touring is off. We've had to sort of reconfigure the way that we approach the creation of art, the releasing of art, the release of the experience of being a part of art. All that has had to have been reimagined in a lot of different ways. And I do think there are some silver linings here, which we can sort of get into down the road. But the real pain point for me is just watching people suffering, whether it's booking agents, and we've seen agency after agency announce different layoffs and furloughs. I don't love huge conglomerates like Live Nation and Ticketmaster fundamentally, but it breaks my heart to see venues beginning to close and people being furloughed from those kinds of companies. Musicians who are, road dog players in bands, and it's really disheartening to see.
Yeah, there you go. Honest analysis of what's going on. Can I ask you, I've always assumed since physical has been declining and digital has been increasing, that the kind of the income streams for managed artists and managers is very tipped towards live music. Is that true? And are you able to talk about sort of what percentage of your artist base is for live versus recorded music in terms of revenue?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very nuanced question, and I think that there are so many different scenarios where that proportion of touring versus other revenues can be um, heavily pronounced or not very pronounced. So I'll talk about a couple of different kinds of concepts that I'm thinking of as it relates to the question.
Okay.
First of all, I think that's always been the case, even before streaming, with CD sales and before that cassettes and vinyl. You still had a large chunk of an artist's revenue coming from touring. And touring is also the best way to ensure that an artist has a longer career and also has the most control over their career. Once you sign a record deal, you're sort of, you're abdicating your authority and rights over the masters that you create. But touring, you can do anytime. You can decide to tour all year long if you're capable of doing that from a fan base standpoint, or tour infrequently. Or like Morrissey, you can tour and cancel all the dates every time. But, so it really depends on the artist. We have a couple of different types of artists that we work with currently and over the years. Some have had massive hits in their career and are still, those hits are kind of evergreen. And so they throw off a fair amount of money from the master and publishing side. So touring for an artist like that is really about a personal desire to be out on the road or not be out on the road. So in that case, it can really be, sometimes an even split 50-50 between touring and royalties from recorded music. It can skew even heavier towards the recorded music side from a financial split. So it sort of depends on the type of artist you are and the type of artist you're working with. But the type of artist that we're attracted to, that I'm attracted to in general, is an artist who has the ability to tour, who has a fan base that is interested in them touring, because it is much easier to market to an artist's fan base if they're active and they're interested in seeing live music. It's much more difficult to make a connection between an artist who has maybe massive streaming numbers, but not necessarily what I would call an active participatory fan base. And we do work with an artist, a relatively new artist, who actually has really phenomenal streaming numbers, but doesn't really have much of a touring presence. And it's much harder. It's very difficult for me to really make a meaningful impact in that artist's career, because I don't really have the ability to connect those streams with marketing and other initiatives that normally I would put forth for artists. So most of the artists that we work with are touring based, and touring is a majorly important component, both financially and from a marketing capability standpoint. I don't know if that totally answers the question.
Rishon, that really does answer the question. And it's extremely interesting because there's a lot of conversation in the music industry about driving people towards streams. And there's conversations from traditional artists that have been around pre-streaming who are frustrated that they're driving their audience towards a streaming platform, and thus losing that direct connection to fan, as well as being concerned about what the payout is per stream and the overall payout as well as for a career. So it's really interesting to have your perspective. You've been managing artists, or your company's been around for 25 plus years. To have your perspective of seeing all these different phases and understanding that it's not just about, well, where's the money being driven from, but how are you creating and keeping and maintaining and engaging the fans. And the communication with fans, which is really interesting to think about with the live side. It's not just a revenue stream that's harder to get right now under a lockdown situation, but it's also creating another barrier to reaching those fans because you can't tour.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the biggest missing element right now as far as releasing records. We have released a major record during the pandemic. Actually, I think it was March 27th, if I have the date right. We released Vanessa Carlton's new album that we've been working on for the last, almost 3 years. And we decided to keep that date, even though things were obviously absolutely chaotic and crazy at that moment in time, mainly because we felt like people are going to need art and want art, and we thought the album was sort of timely and made sense at this moment in time. But we lost this major driver of having a huge national and international tour to use as a marketing vehicle. Going into each market, talking to journalists there, meeting with radio stations, meeting fans physically at shows, signing autographs, taking pictures. I mean, all those things are vital to the overall marketing of music. And frankly, it's, as I've mentioned already, I think it is the best way for an artist to control the message and also control their ability to actually reach genuine fans who are truly interested in what they're doing. Not that we don't also care about passive fans. They're awesome, but we know that we can't do much more with them. So that touring it's a really huge gaping hole in the overall portfolio of an artist's viability, I would say.
Hey, while we're on the topic, a great UK kind of music industry, music tech newsletter called Music Ally did an interview with Spotify's Daniel Ek, the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And this quote, "You can't record music every 3 or 4 years and think that's going to be enough," kind of blew up in the media, the music industry media. I mean, there's like dozens of articles that are quoting it and people criticizing him for saying that. And you literally just said your artist just released the record you've been working on for 3 years. Did you see that quote?
Yeah.
I'm curious what your reaction is to that.
I did see that quote, and I actually am a firm believer in that quote. It's almost like people fighting against change and technological advancement. This is just the reality. It's the evolution of the music business, and it's the evolution driven by technology of the music business. And the reality is that, millions and millions and millions of artists around the world can release music constantly. So there's the barriers to entry to be an artist, in air quotes and not in air quotes, has really, democratized over the last 20 years. So I don't want to say that the channels are clogged, but there's a massive volume of stuff coming out every single week. And I think we as a society, and especially the younger generation who are completely digital natives, they're used to on demand, and they're used to listening to whatever they want to listen to when they want to listen to it. And so if you're not out there with content somewhat frequently, and we've experimented with a variety of different ways to do that, and I'm a fan of almost all of the alternate ways of releasing music, whether it's one single at a time until you release the full album, or releasing EPs seasonally, or whatever that methodology is. I do believe that the creation of content needs to happen pretty continuously. And actually, that dovetails nicely with the silver lining I was talking about with the pandemic. Artists are now, taking to the airwaves, and by the airwaves, I mean live streaming regularly, constantly. Some artists are doing it multiple times a week. They have different types of shows. To me, that is the world that we live in. For better or for worse, we live in a world where constant content creation is a benefit to an artist's overall, career trajectory. Then again, I'm a manager. I don't control the artist. I work to maximize whatever the artist's goals are and protect them and service them. So that being said, Vanessa is the kind of artist that records an album every few years. She gets these bursts of creativity. She has to sort of release an album and then sort of pull back from it and absorb and obviously market and promote it, and then figure out the next inspirational moment or inspirational, whatever that moment of inspiration is going to be to create a new thing. So it doesn't work for everybody. But I completely understand where Daniel's coming from, and I understand from his services standpoint where he's coming from, because he sees the data, and he can analyze, what's effective and what's not effective. And I'm sure that what he's seeing is artists that are releasing more frequently are more top of mind, and artists that are releasing less frequently, especially after several years, the people that were fans of them 3 years ago may or may not care anymore. They may have moved on to completely other types of music and other experiences.
Wow, man, there's so much to unpack there. I think in that last answer, you probably hit. We did these seismic shift trading cards. I don't know if I've told you about this, Rishon, but last year at the conference, we did 18 trading cards, and each one's a seismic shift in the music industry. And we handed them out at the conference in LA last October, and people would get a few of the cards, and they had to trade with each other to get the full set. But one of them was music's. Yeah, it was kind of a fun way to just like talk about some of the top level ideas you're talking about that really affect strategy and tactics in the music space. But one of them was music's in the hands of the masses. One of them is music as an experience. One of them is the gates are broken. Music is competing with everything. I mean, like, I could go on. There's many paths to listening. There's more music than ever. These are all seismic shifts that literally touch on what you just said in terms of your reaction to Daniel Ek's comment. And, you know, it's interesting as a manager and an advocate for artists to see both sides, but also to recognize that it's a change in how people are engaging with not just music, but all forms of media, because music's competing with everything. I mean, shoot, not only do you have more music coming out than ever because the barrier to entry, as you mentioned, is so much lower, and there's so many ways to get your music out there. You also have gaming, and you have fitness, and you have, just so many different little industries exploding that are calling for people's attention. And people are sleeping less and watching Netflix more. So, it's really tough to kind of maintain it. So I see what you're saying. Like, regardless of what your creative style is, whether it's you got to have those creative bursts over the course of years versus you got to be tweeting all the time or TikToking, whatever your latest thought is. Yeah. It's how do you maintain the engagement and conversation so people remember you when you do have something good to offer.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, you mentioned that it's very difficult, or maybe I mentioned that it's very difficult to make the connection between the streaming audience and the active audience that may love a band, and musicians are sort of railing against pushing people towards streaming because it is difficult to connect those dots. And I do agree with that. I think that you have to be trying at every turn as an artist to get people to sign email lists and to incentivize people to sign email lists, because those are the places where you have control over connection and contact with your fans. So for those artists that are out there that are just pushing things to streaming and not trying to figure out ways to get email addresses, I think that's a huge mistake. I do think Spotify and Apple and the other platforms that are out there are beginning to develop more robust tools to make connections. But at the end of the day, having someone's email address and being able to direct market to them is the most important thing an artist can do.
Yeah. So tell us about what your artists are doing to adapt to the inability to have live audiences, to perform live. It's so important to have those that kind of self-fulfillment ability to reach out to fans directly. You talked about how touring has always been that connection in watching your artists' careers, and now you talked about how some of them are really leaning into live streaming. What are your artists doing in that world?
Yeah, I mean, it's it is somewhat limited as to what can be done because you've taken the entire live human element out of it. So at the beginning of the pandemic, when everything started in mid-March, I think there was a lot of paralysis on everybody's part. But we had this record that had to come out 2 weeks later. I think I sort of put like March 15th as the date that everything kind of shut down. And we had this record coming out for Vanessa on the 27th. So we were really thrust into a lot of different live streaming scenarios, which was great for me because I got to see so many different ways that artists can do that, depending on the platform, whether it's, an Instagram Live and then saving stuff to IGTV or Facebook Live or YouTube or, Zoom stuff. I really got a crash course quite quickly about a lot of the different ways that artists can connect. And I took those things that I learned with releasing Vanessa's record, and I tried to, educate the artists that I'm working with, and some of them really took to it more than others. So I'll sort of break it down into a bunch of different sections of what overall the artists have been doing. To start with, they've all been writing more. So they've really taken this time to either write new music or record new music. I have one artist that had just finished recording an album when all this went down. He has since recorded a completely new companion piece album to that album, which is essentially alternative versions of everything on the, for lack of a better phrase, the source album. He then also is almost finished recording a full covers album. So, in the time that we've been dealing with the pandemic, he's essentially written, the next 2 records that he can release over the next, almost 3 years. And the plan for that is actually to release it in a more sort of modern Daniel Ek kind of way, where we're going to release 7 singles over the course of the next 8 or 9 months, separating them about 6 or 7 weeks apart, because that's the recommended spacing for pitching to Spotify. And then the album itself will come out in the summer of next year. And then we'll take that companion record and do something similar with that. So that'll extend that life of that album for another year. I haven't even told the label about the covers album that we have almost completed already. So that's one pillar, right? So I think every artist is doing, at least every artist that I'm working with has taken this time to write and record new material. I do work with a decent number of sort of individual artists, not bands. However, the band that I work with, or one of the bands that I work with, has been meeting in small groups and doing writing sessions and beginning to plan out how they're going to record. They're based in Pittsburgh, and I think they're in phase 4 there, so they are able to get together in small groups and do stuff. So that's sort of one pillar: a lot of writing, a lot of recording. The live streaming pillar and all the things that go with sort of the human element of performance, I've really come to view it as like network television or cable television, where you can do a variety of different things, either as an individual artist or sort of a group of artists. So we've created different properties for different clients of ours, where one of our clients had at the height of it 4 different shows a week, where they were utilizing, one was the lead singer doing a show, and that was sort of the capstone show of the week, and that had the most viewership, and that was on Facebook. Then that same lead singer would do a covers only show, but vacillating between Instagram and Facebook. And then the bass player and the guitarist would have their own show that they would do every other week. The guitarist would do one week, the bass player would do another week. And that was a little bit of songwriting conversations and performances mixed with the guitar player has 2 daughters who sing and perform as well. So he had like almost like a Von Trapp family thing going on with it. And then the guitar player was using a platform called Station Head, which I think is awesome. And that sits on top of Spotify and Apple and allows you to be your own DJ, to DJ and curate a music show. And so he was essentially, and he's still doing it, he had his own radio show. He would bring people on and interview them. He would sort of theme it each week. And he'd have a playlist that then we would post. He would do this on Sunday night, and either Monday or Tuesday, we'd post it to social media, and you could listen to the playlist on Spotify. And Vanessa Carlton is also doing that. She has a Station Head show. So I've really looked at this as a way to have a variety of different types of experiences with the artists that we work with. And some have not really embraced the live streaming stuff. One of my artists has really done more video recordings of him performing songs live and putting those on the air. I think it's been tough because different people have different family situations. The artist that's doing these videos and posting them as opposed to doing it live have 2 young, he has 2 young kids, one that's sub 1 year old and another one that's 3 or 4. So it's very difficult to have a house that's totally quiet to do, say, an hour-long stream. So it's different strokes for different folks. We did do one drive-in theater show, which was successful, and I'm trying to do at least one more before the summer's done. It was interesting. It was different. I think the fans really loved it. I know the band loved it because they were finally able to perform live. And that was a great experience. And we had 400 cars and sold out this 800 car venue. The state required that we'd have half capacity so that there was adequate spacing between cars, and people could get out of their cars because there was adequate spacing.
Hey, Rishon, what did that look like? What was the band doing, and what were the fans doing in that setting?
Yeah, so it was really interesting because you don't realize just how much space you need for 800 cars. And even though there were only 400 cars there, we still had the footprint of 800 cars because we had to separate those cars out. It's a huge space. So this particular drive-in had 3 different screens, and we utilized all 3 screens. We had a video crew come in and film it. So if you're up close, and there were VIP quote unquote seats, the cars that are closer, we upcharged a little bit for like a gold circle. They could really see the band on the stage. But if you're in the back, the band is like almost a half a mile away from you. So the video performance and the videoing of the performance was really crucial. But it was great. I mean, every report that we got back was really, really positive. Logistically, I think it's a bit of a nightmare, but thankfully, one of the promoters took it on themselves to deal with all that. So we didn't really have to deal with too much logistic elements of it. But it was really wonderful. I wish it were an easier thing to do because I'd like to see more of that. And I think it's a really obvious way to perform, especially if you have an audience or you have an artist that can reach an audience that size. It's not a cheap proposition. I want to say that each car started at $100 a car, and then increased based on the number of people you had in the car. So it's, ultimately ends up being about a $25 ticket, which isn't a fortune, but there certainly were cars that had 2 people in it. So that's a $50 ticket, right? So,
they should have put some more people in the car.
Yeah. We definitely encourage, with safety in mind, people to carpool and share where they were in pods together or felt comfortable doing that, families, etc. And then the last 2 things I'll mention is that we've essentially rethought out the live album, and we are now about to release our second live from the Livestream album,
All right.
which are live, the live performances that you see on the live stream recorded and mixed down in a rudimentary fashion, and then released, into the streaming DSP world so that people can get it on whatever platform they happen to be on. So we released one of those 2 weeks ago for our client, William Fitzsimmons. And at some point, hopefully this month or early September, we're going to release a best of live of the live stream from our client, the Clarks. So that's, sort of an interesting reimagining of the live album concept. And I think that that's something that every artist can do and, in my opinion, should do, because I think it's a marker of time that people will remember. Because they'll know where they were when they watched the live stream for that artist. They'll remember the circumstances of what was going on in their life. And it may have been not the greatest moment, but perhaps that particular live stream was what brought them the joy in this time of difficulty. And then the other thing we did is we've created merch specific to the live streams. So we created, in particular, that capstone show for the Clarks with the lead singer, which was called the Blasement Show, because his last name is Blasey, and the live stream was from his basement. So one of the fans in like the first week said, "Oh, you're live in the Blasement," and that kind of caught on. And we created a Live in the Blasement T-shirt, and we sold 1,000 units of it. I mean, it was a really massive success, and I think it goes to show you that if you have a direct connection with your audience, and your audience cares about you, and you're providing them with something that they really love, there are other ways to monetize it. We have not charged for any live stream that we've done. And I don't say that like as some sort of like badge of honor, like, we didn't charge. We just did not feel like we could figure out the right way to go about doing that. So we raised money for charity, and then we created these merch items that we've sold, and the live stream albums. And that was sort of the monetization angle. So those are sort of the breadth of the different types of things we've been doing. And I think there are some silver linings there. I mean, Before the pandemic, if I asked somebody to do a live stream, it was like, I'm twisting their arm.
Yeah.
And now I think it's a much better promotional vehicle, and artists understand the benefit to it. And I do think that radio stations and other outlets, other marketing and promotion outlets, will be more apt to allow that kind of an interface, so that perhaps an artist that we might have had to send to Europe to do a promo tour to hit a bunch of radio stations, perhaps we can do that all through live streams, which we've done a fair amount of as well during the pandemic. But it seems like it's opened up avenues that we can use post-pandemic as well.
Wow. I mean, the breadth of what you've just described is how artists are responding from your roster. It's so diverse. There's so many different methods there, and it just shows so much creativity in the way that the format, the shape of the format. And it's so interesting to think about, because there's so many conversations about, well, my creativity's in my music. I don't really want to do the marketing, or I don't want to do the business side or whatever. But there's a lot of creativity. Now, maybe that's the benefit of having a whole roster rather than just talking about one artist's career, where there's only so much one person can do. But I'm really impressed, and it does make me kind of, and this is why I wanted to have you on the podcast. We had you on a panel at the Isolate or Innovate Forum. You and I met on a round table online on a Zoom as well. And I just really am interested in how you and your artists are thinking about those formats and being really creative with them, and also adapting to what those individual artists can actually do. You talk about some of them have young kids and they can't do certain things. There's certain limitations placed there. But dude, from cable TV show style live streams to drive-in theaters, that's quite a variety.
Yeah, I mean, look, necessity is the mother of invention, and I think that is so true in this situation, where all of a sudden we're like, what do we do, and how do we do it, and where do we do it? Thankfully, there were these outlets to do the live streaming. I mean, I think Instagram Live, is probably less than a year old, and a lot of these platforms, if it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, you wouldn't have it. Stage It, which has been around that long, and has benefited immensely from this, is an awesome platform, but it's built on Flash. So there's so many things that we're evolving and innovating in this moment of time, and necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And that's really what allowed us to do the things that we did. And frankly, a huge credit to the artists that I work with, that I would throw out some crazy ideas and they'd go for it. They were like, yeah, let's try it. We don't know if it'll work. We don't know if we're going to like doing it, but let's try it. And I think that's a huge credit to them, that they were willing to take the leap of faith and learn a lot of technology that they didn't know and understand before. I mean, doing a live stream is not as simple as just turning your phone on and starting to play. Yeah, you can do it that way, but if you want the experience to be better, you really have to get some gear involved. You have to figure out some audio tricks and some ways to do that. And they really invested the time and effort into doing that. So hats off to them.
This pandemic has really, because of the drying up of the live revenue stream, it's really put a focus back onto the kind of the relationship between artists and streaming services. Not live streaming, just audio streaming. Mm-hmm. And the move to digital has been tough for a lot of artists pre-pandemic. And though the record industry seems to have finally returned to being a profitable business, we still hear from many artists that they're not seeing enough revenue to make a living. I'm curious, and we can go brief on this because we've got some other questions we want to get to. What's your take on music streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Prime, and so forth? You already mentioned your thoughts on the timing of frequency of releases and how to engage with fans. But are these services being unfair to artists, or does it have to do with the deals with labels, or is there too much competition and these artists are misdirecting their criticism? What's your take on this relationship, this financial relationship between music streaming services and artists?
The answer, I think, is yes to everything you just said.
It's all of those things.
Too many artists. Yeah. Yes, there's too many artists. Yes, the deals with record companies are absolutely horrible. Yes, the streaming companies are not paying out enough to the artists. So I think it's all of those things. But again, it's like, fighting change. Technology is evolution, and the business is evolving to streaming and the streaming platforms that are there. I don't know if there'll be multiple platforms in the long run, but there certainly are now. And I think it's pretty common knowledge also that, we'll use Spotify as the example because we were talking about it before, they're paying out about 70% of every dollar that comes in to artists. Now, most of those artists are being paid through the record label. So it's actually the record label that's getting paid, right? So if most of the artists are on record labels and it's the record label that's getting paid, then yes, you have to look at the deal that you have with your record label, which we all know is a horrible deal. Like even the best artists, the most successful artists, their record label deals are not good deals. And I'm not saying that should fundamentally change because there's a whole value proposition there and an economic model that's pretty well understood, but it's still an absolutely horrible deal. So when you talk about building a company, when you already know that the minimum you're going to have to pay out is 70% and your margin is, approximately 30%, give or take, it's pretty hard to build a viable, globally dominant company with 30% margins or even shrinking from there, because there are instances where as more and more artists and more people join these services, more and more money gets paid out. And so the economic model can be difficult to sustain. So, I don't have the answer. I don't know what the right balance is, but I do know Tidal pays out a lot more than the other services do. But I also know that Tidal is, a minuscule fraction of market share of these other companies. So I'm not sure that model is really effective. And I don't think it's because people don't like Tidal. They don't have the capability to spend money on marketing and getting these additional listeners. So perhaps that's the reason why they're not bigger. They're paying out too much money. Spotify paying out 70%. That's a healthy amount of money going out the door to artists. Do I feel like the artists that I work with that are not on record labels that are getting direct payments are getting compensated adequately? Not really. I'd love to see more money going to the artists, but I also understand from a business owner and technology person who exists in the world of technology that you can't really build a business with margins that thin. So I do think that there is a massive amount of music out there, and the more music that there is, the more difficult for the quality music to find an audience. I also think there's a massive gulf between massive artists and the rest of the world. Statistically, most of the plays on streaming services go to massive artists. And that's just kind of the way it is. We thought that digital would be different and it would be more of a long tail, so that artists there that were not massive would not necessarily get a huge boost right at the release date. But over time, the album would find an audience and it would grow and grow and grow. And that's not really the case in most instances. So I think that there are a lot of different things at play here. And some of it goes beyond just the streaming services, but I do think that there is a difficulty in greater payouts from the streaming services or greater percentage of revenue going out to artists and labels from the streaming services, because I don't think that's a viable business model. I do think streaming is the future, is the present, and going to be the future. I don't know what comes after streaming. I can't imagine that there is much that comes after streaming. And so despite all of these things, and we control a fair number of masters for the clients that we represent. So for us, I can see the streaming numbers. And the bottom line is, like, we drive people to streaming because that's where the people are and that's where the people are going to be. So we want to make sure that we understand how to most effectively communicate and motivate people to listen to things on the streaming platforms, interact with the streaming platforms, help us to address the algorithmic nature of the streaming platforms. But at the end of the day, this is the world we live in. It is evolution is a real thing, and evolution also occurs in business, and technology is spurring evolution at the moment. And streaming services are here to stay. So I don't know that it's worth it to complain per se. We should always push for better.
Yeah. Okay, great. Really appreciate the context there. Speaking of technology, let's talk about your other business, 10X Management. What is it and why and how did you start it?
Yeah, so we started Brickwall Management, which is our artist management company, in 1995. And the internet was already a thing at that point, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we were hiring tech freelancers to build websites for the clients we worked with. When the iPhone came out and the App Store came to life, we partnered with a dev shop to build apps for the entertainment world to basically release, like deluxe albums through an app ecosystem where you could bundle all these different elements together and sort of add value, like video and lyrics and uh, karaoke functionality, all that kind of stuff. And we just kept bumping into the same kind of problems over and over again. And at the time, we didn't think we were necessarily going to be part of the solution until about 2010, when people started to refer to tech talent as rock stars. And I think for us, it was sort of a light bulb moment. We're like, we deal with rock stars already. Perhaps this vertical would have the same kind of need for representation that we've seen in entertainment and sports for, several decades now. And so we set out to do that in 2011. And by 2012, we had sort of proven the concept to be effective. We started 10x Management. And I would essentially say what we did is we brought the concept of, like CAA or William Morris Endeavor, that type of representation merged with almost producer management, where a producer manager helps to find artists for a producer to work with, or sometimes the artist and or label comes to them and they help negotiate the terms of that relationship. And then once all that's done, their client, the producer, goes off and produces the record, and the manager functions more as somebody who helps to ensure that the process and the project runs on schedule, not project managing, but just problem managing any issues. And so that's essentially what we did. We created the first of its kind tech talent agency, which melded management elements with agency elements, with the goal of taking all the business elements off of the table for the clients we work with, the tech talent, so that they could focus on what they do best. And on the company side, companies had a difficult time identifying, vetting, and figuring out who would make sense for given projects. And we took that problem off of their plate as well. So we became like a personal shopper for companies to find the right kind of talent. And there's so many parallels to the music business and artists in general. I think tech talent is very similar. It's a very similar sort of mental makeup to an artist. I'd say the main difference is that the work that they do is much more private. So, an artist for years growing up is told by their parents, their teachers, friends and family, just how brilliant they are, how amazing they are. And, so they grow up thinking, I'm amazing. I'm this amazing, human being, and I deserve X, Y, and Z. And I think that creates a lot of the interesting personality types that we've seen over the years in music, the adulation and the drive for me. But in tech, most of the stuff has been private, coding late into the night. If anything, parents are probably like, Johnny and Jane, please get out more. Like, go play outside, stop playing on the computer. And so I think that there's a different ego proposition there, but the mental makeup and the interests are all the same. Almost every techie that we represent at 10X Management either is a musician or is a hobbyist musician. Some of them have their own record labels or they're DJs. So there's definitely a lot of similarity, but that's essentially what we did, and we've been running 10X Management now since essentially 2011.
And you have a book coming out, Game Changers, that's kind of based in both of these practices, or this merged practice of managing artists and producers and songwriters on the one hand, and then managing this tech talent on the other. Tell us a little bit about the book, and what can our listeners maybe learn from some of the things you've come up with there?
So the book is called Game Changer: How to Be 10X in the Talent Economy, and it comes out on September 22nd. I just had to get that plug in. Thank you very much.
No problem.
And it's available for pre-order right now. And so let me just first say that the concept of 10X is really this idea of somebody who is equally capable in the IQ department, so the intelligent quotient, and the EQ department, the emotional quotient, which is really the the secret sauce to being a 10xer. So it's this idea of somebody who is exceptionally talented both at concepting and iterating in an elegant way, as well as explaining and communicating what it is they're doing. And I think that this is something that can be applied to any vertical. In the book, we use technology and music sort of as the backdrop for obvious reasons, because that's where our experience lies. But this is something that can really be attributed to any vertical, any kind of business, any kind of individual. And we sort of split the book into two parts. One part is about what companies, any kind of company, can do to become more hospitable to 10x type talent, because we're entering a period of time, and this is a little bit off topic, but AI and machine learning and automation are displacing tons of jobs and are going to displace massive swaths of jobs. And we're going to enter a period of time where sort of the knowledge worker, people with this 10x level capability, are really going to be running the growth and development of companies moving forward, because so many of the repetitive tasks will be handled by automation. So this is really about companies preparing themselves for this knowledge economy or the talent economy. And for the companies, we talk about, what you need to do to be more hospitable to 10x level talent, how you can attract them, how you can hire them, how you can manage them. Because if you can't do those things and you aren't hospitable to this kind of talent, you're going to lose a massive competitive advantage, because these types of people, they are the rock stars. They are the, Tom Cruises in acting or Bruce Springsteen in music. They're the people that can make and bring seismic change to an organization. So everybody needs to be aware of what it takes to attract and manage that kind of talent. And then the other half of the book is really about what individuals can do to push down the 10x spectrum towards 10xness. So it's a little bit of, self-improvement, but really with some practical, prescriptive paths that people can follow. And it's the same thing for businesses. It's about what people need to do, what organizations need to do to work with and manage 10xers. And there's a lot of really cool interviews with people in the music business there, people like John Landau and Barbara Carr, who managed Bruce Springsteen, Ken Levitan and James Diener from Vector, who manage any number of artists, Elvis Duran, who is a morning show radio personality for the Z100 New York City morning show, as well as iHeart morning show programs. And my client Vanessa Carlton's in it as well. So I think it's a broadly accessible book. It's not a music industry book, and it's not a not music industry book. And it's been really interesting to write it, and it's equally interesting to try and put it out in the middle of a pandemic. But you know what? People need to read, and people are interested. And we also talk a lot about remote work, which before the pandemic, was something we had to try and convince people that remote work was a positive thing and to be prepared for it, and companies need to be willing to allow it. Now, obviously, that is the mode of work that's being done by most companies. So it's also a timely book, I think.
Well, that's really cool. I'm looking forward to checking it out. And Rishon, apparently you and I could talk for hours and hours, but if anyone's still commuting, their drive's probably just about up. This has been tons of fun to talk with you, Rishon. Thanks so much for coming in. We'll get you more involved with some other music tectonic stuff down the road. But congrats with all your success, both on the artist side and the tech management side. Super innovative. Love how generous you were with your thoughts today.
Well, I truly appreciate you having me on. And the last little thing I just want to say, if anybody's interested in taking a quiz to see where they rank on the 10x scale, they can do so at gamechangerthebook.com. There's a quiz there that is pretty cool, and we'll give you some insights into what people need to do in order to become more 10x-like.
Very cool. We will post that link in the Music Tectonics app as well. Thanks for joining me, Rishon.
Thanks for having me. Really love the conversation.
Likewise. And thank you for joining the podcast. Like I said, come to the Music Tectonics app. It's available in iOS and Android. We post news articles there. We have AMA, Ask Me Anythings. We've got hundreds of music tech startups, record labels, managers, innovators, anyone that's working in music tech. That's the place to be. It also has a browser version if you don't have a smartphone, app.musictectonics.com. And also check out musictectonics.com to find out about our just announced online conference, October 27th to 28th, 2020. We're doing some great things there to create a very interactive, fun way to get business done. We've got some great thought leadership coming in there. As I mentioned, Scott Cohen from Warner Music Group will be speaking, Sherry Hu from Water and Music, and John Vlasopoulos from Roblox. He's the global head of music. Roblox is an incredible gaming platform that tons of kids, millions of kids are using. And we've got investors from Panache Ventures, Lean Square. We're going to be talking about all sorts of interesting stuff in innovation and music tech. Thanks for listening. Check out musictectonics.com. We'll be back with more episodes soon.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.